right, everybody, we're live today. Thank you so much for joining in. It's Breaking the Seal, episode 9. With me today, we got the ghost host.
You already know.
Yes, sir. We got Ghost in the building.
Bam, 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 bam.
So today, we got an awesome episode for y'all today. The UFO Conference is coming up April 8th, 9th, 10th. Major dates are going to be the 9th and the 10th. Starts up on the 8th, though. But awesome event. We have Noe Torres joining in. He's the founder of this event. He teamed up with the city of Edinburg to get this awesome event going. So we talked to him about that. And an awesome, man, a lot of unusual activity, right, Ghost?
Yeah, a lot of unusual activity, not only, across the US, but there has been some activity here in the Valley, the RGV. Of course, there's that Edinburg case back in 1966, but then he even, talking about his own personal family accounts of some crazy, paranormal / alien stuff. So yeah, it's really good stuff. We actually kind of broke it up in 2 parts, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But
yeah, we're gonna break this up into 2 parts for you. This episode, part 1 is gonna be premiering today, and then part 2 will be airing that in the next few weeks before the event. So we got a lot of good stuff, that we talked about the event, how it started, and then a lot of paranormal activity going out up there in the valley. So yeah, it was cool to talk to him and talk about that. But today's beer, I just want to get it started. I've already been eyeing it. It's St. Arnold. It's called the Comeback Belgian style wit. So it's a really awesome brew that we're going to be trying out. The thing I liked about it, that it was a collaboration with the Houston Zoo, and I was reading up more on it. So they did it to help out the wildlife as far as like the reptiles, things like that. That's kind of why it has the reptile skin. I don't know.
Oh,
you
yeah,
can see it.
It's like green, scaly skin.
It's like a little green and scaly, but it's something awesome. And I love when breweries can do that, when they can put a cause together and then sell some brew and have people enjoy and help out at the same time. So
it's a great combo.
Cool, awesome beer. We found it at HEB, and I'm glad that we can try it out. They're out of Houston, so make sure you go show them some support. It's gonna be St. Arnold's brew, so I'm ready to try it out. It's a citrus. It says that it's a citrus and a crisp and citrusy. So
yeah,
let's try it out. Cheers, brother.
Yeah, cheers, brother. Cheers.
I'm really excited about this episode and this beer.
Yeah, definitely has that citrusy aftertaste. A little slight, hoppy, but it's definitely smooth. It definitely could gulp that down probably in like
I was just sipping it. It's like the flavor, it's not it's not bad. It's smooth. It's just something that goes down real easy for me. I really recommend it, especially like the hot spring day. Spring's already coming up. We're already in spring break, man.
Yeah, what happened? Where's time gone, man?
A year already, and it's been awesome. Just at least we're starting up some stuff. But this is an awesome beer to get out there, party with, drink up. Huge shout out to St. Arnold. So we recommend this one.
And super smooth intake.
Well, at least I do. What do you think about it, Ghost?
Yeah, no, it's great. I would definitely say it's a spring beer, borderline even summer beer. Definitely, I would say more so spring, especially with spring break just happening. I want to say, I know you guys are still kind of feeling the spring break vibe, so
missing that spring break vibe.
Yeah, it's been 2
years
long.
Almost.
Yeah, now that we're older, I guess we don't enjoy it as much as you youngins.
No, but we're itching. We're itching for another one. Post-pandemic, you all get crazy.
Yeah. I know some of y'all out there getting crazy.
But this is a cool beer we got. I mean, I'm gonna drink this down and pour it up. But thank you all, for your support. I can't say it enough. Every week we're growing and we're getting more views. We're getting more downloads. So appreciate you all. Remember, you can find us on Spotify. You can find us on YouTube. And then now every Wednesday, we're going to be on Distortion Radio too. So make sure you tune in, distortionradiotx.com.
Yes, sir.
Awesome, stuff too, man.
And real quick, so was tuning in Distortion Radio the other day, and honestly, man, they have some good stuff on their music content. They have the range. I was listening to a little bit of hip hop, a little bit of rock, And like Hollow said, man, I mean, all the content that he's been receiving musically wise has been good content. You know what? And I agree with it.
Mhm.
And for the most part, it's all local. So
Yeah, man. There was even a track that they played after ours. It was really I liked it. I was digging it, man. It had it was a nice little hip hop jam. I wish I'd have got the artist's name so I can give him a huge shout out. But dude, now man, I'm excited and I'm glad that we get to see some of these artists too in person in the next few weeks. So next week we're gonna be at the After Dark Festival. We'll be there. But yeah, just stay tuned to what we have to offer. I just want to give a huge shout out to Noe for joining in. I know he's a busy guy. He's author. I mean, he's written a few, and
15, he
yeah,
mentioned 15 books.
he's written a lot of books about the incidents. But the way that he takes his approach is one thing that really gets me. You know, he really takes it and he tries to get the most credible source as possible, whether it be from a journal account or it be from a newspaper article. You know, just right there in the middle. You know, like I even mentioned, like that was like our Twitter. That was Twitter back then. You know, the newspaper once it was out there, that's word. It's on paper. You know, I think that's where that expression comes from. On paper. You know, it's there.
Yeah, and his background, we didn't really get into it too much, but he does mention, and basically his background is
What
he's
he
a
made him, yeah,
yeah,
man.
he's a librarian.
And especially
So
growing up in that area that he said he grew, like that those little decades that he grew up in. It was that time where people were talking about UFO movies were coming out, things of that nature. So it was really cool to see somebody that locally, do all this, and then also just have an event like this, like bringing other people from all over the nation to come over here and see what we have to offer as a community. Like he was saying, a few of these guys that he's bringing in, they're loving Edinburg. They love the environment. They love the city. They love the food, of course. Best tacos in the world.
And some of the lineup that he has for this upcoming event. I mean, he was going over the people, and they sound legit. Some former CIA, former FBI, some guy from British Intel that was solely focused
yeah,
on
man.
UFO
Nick
sightings.
Pope. Uh huh.
Yeah, so this guy is bringing down this event. Of course, it's going to be the 8th, the 9th, the 10th of April. So, if y'all want to, go, definitely go. Y'all going to definitely
Yeah, and if you didn't
trip out a
know,
little bit.
this festival is one thing that we did mention. It's the top UFO festival, UFO conference in the world, one of the top. So I think this was like in 2016. I was hearing one of his radio his videos on YouTube. It said that Roswell was 10th at the time, and they were 3rd at the time. So this was a few years ago. So this conference, it continues to improve and continues to grow. They have the free outdoor event. But if you do want to hear some more speakers, then you do have to pay for that. But
and that's on Saturday. I think that's just solely on Saturday.
That's on Saturday. So hopefully we get to go check it out and see what people are about, and talk to them, see their experience. But I really appreciate Noe again. Thank you so much for joining in. And here's Noe to talk about the event and his experience and what he's been researching. So thank you all for joining in. Really appreciate it.
Let's get into it.
Yes, sir. Hey everybody, with me today we have Noe Torres. He's a local author, local historian as well, and a researcher. He also, started out with this convention. It was his little baby, and he got it out there too. This is going to be the UFO convention coming up in Edinburg. Did I say that right?
That's correct. It's going to be our 9th annual, so we're very happy, very excited.
Awesome, man. That's good stuff. So, Noe, tell us a little bit more about yourself, and just a little bit about your background. I know, I was watching a few of your videos, and you said you were a librarian previously, right?
Yeah, I've been a librarian for about 30 years now, and I basically grew up in libraries here in South Texas, and I've always been interested in UFOs ever since I was a little kid. Because of an experience that my mom had that she used to tell me about. So,
and what experience? And sorry, real quick, what experience was that? If you don't mind just asking real quick.
And we lived in a rural area between Mission and Edinburg, and back in the 1940s, before I was born, my mom encountered some kind of paranormal anomaly in the woods. Basically what is now North Sherry Road.
Wow, okay.
Near 107. And it was extremely dark back then. Sherry was just a little 2-lane blacktop. And my family's little frame home was set off from the road quite a distance, kind of in a wooded area, brushy area. And so my dad was working construction out of state. He was on various construction crews. So she was alone with my older brothers who were young. And she was drawn to the back part, to the back, what we would call the backyard. She went out the back door and into the woods, and there was a strange, I feel it was some type of craft. She never was able to look up. She said that it was as if her muscles in her neck were frozen and she could not lift her head up to see what was above her, but there were lights. There was a lot of noise, sounded like machinery. And she had, I believe, 3 dogs as household pets at that time, and they were all jumping up in the air and snapping their jaws at whatever it was. So it was a very frightening experience. She doesn't remember how long it went on, but anyway, I was, and also when I grew up, when I went to elementary school in the 60s, high school in the 70s, the topic of UFOs was still very big. So we had come through the space program. Everybody was interested in outer space, the race to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just all of that experience, and even here in Roswell, right? Hearing about that too, or that was even before that, like and then your mom's experience. So that's really what jump started everything, right? Just
so I started reading book after book. I one of my favorite authors of the time was Frank Edwards, who unfortunately has passed away, but he wrote many books about UFOs, encounters, and as well as other strange events, unexplained events. He was kind of the godfather of all this strange and unexplained stuff that we see on cable TV now, along with Eric von Däniken, who did the Ancient Alien series in the late 60s.
Oh, wow.
And those guys were the pioneers. And then my good friend Stanton Friedman, who passed away recently, he was the first one to write and speak extensively about UFOs. And I had the privilege of working with Stanton on many projects together. I had him as one of our speakers here in Edinburgh for the first UFO event that we had originally back in 2011. And then we also had Stanton Friedman. I organized some UFO conferences at various cities throughout the state of Texas. So I had Stanton as a speaker in Laredo at a UFO festival we did there, and then also Del Rio UFO Conference.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, like as far as like I know one of the things that I saw in your videos, the MUFON network. So tell us more about that. I know that's really how you're able to get these conventions together, right? Just having these opportunities.
Well, MUFON is just MUFON's not involved in any of the events that we organize. They are kind of a volunteer group that is interested in researching UFO sightings. And it's all volunteers. And the interesting thing about MUFON is they began in Seguin, Texas, back in the mid to late 60s. They were kind of an offshoot of many other UFO groups from the 50s and 60s. And eventually they coalesced into what is now MUFON, which is like it's one of only a handful of organizations that specialize in following up on UFO reports. A lot of people, you go on the web and there's all kinds of crazy stuff posted by people, but nobody is really following up and trying to talk to the witnesses, trying to find out what exactly happened. Well, MUFON is doing that. Anyone who wants to volunteer to be a UFO investigator with MUFON goes through a training, and they are tested to make sure that they grasp the material, and then they become a UFO investigator official.
Damn, so it's kind of like the real deal then.
It's a real deal. I mean, given that it's not a government group, it's totally a private, nonprofit, volunteer organization. Nobody gets a salary in MUFON. I always joke, my good friend and co-author Ruben J. Uriarte of California, San Francisco Bay Area, I've written seven books with him. And I always joke with him because he's been in the MUFON organization for 20 or 30 years, and he's now one of the head honchos for the organization. And I always tell him, how's your salary doing? Have they given you a raise recently? 0 plus 0 is still 0, Ruben. I kid him. But the thing is, he and I are both so interested in the phenomenon, phenomenon of UFOs. And so it's sort of like what we would like to do anyway, regardless of, it's not really a job.
And it definitely helps out too. Yeah, because it's not like you're not doing it with any, with money. When money is involved, people start questioning things and they kind of get a little... they're like, hey, what do these guys do? But that's good, especially because the way that you all investigate things and that, like, I know one of the things you said in one of your videos is that like about 90% of some of the things you kind of have to discredit, but at the same time, like, you're kind of a skeptic yourself, right? When it comes to some of these
I've always been a skeptic. I need to see evidence. I need to see. I need to see credible witnesses. And, for me, the most credible UFO cases are where you have multiple witnesses who see an event. There are a lot of really good single witness cases, but they're not as believable a lot of times. You can't make as strong of a case about the single witness cases. But you have something like the Stephenville lights of a few years ago, and you have many, many witnesses, including law enforcement officers and so forth, that saw this huge craft over a mile long, some type of mothership, slowly cruising over the skies of Stephenville, and then saw some smaller craft as well. So you have an incident where multiple witnesses in various locations all see the same thing and report similar sighting, then you have something that's really strong. And we have a lot of multiple witness cases.
No, definitely. And I've seen a lot of the accounts, especially one of them I know was, I think it was maybe like 2 years ago. One of the videos that was about 2 years ago, you mentioned a Border Patrol agent. He sent like some footage. So that's one thing that I kind of was intrigued about, that the sources that you're getting and things like that, like you're getting from the newspaper clippings from back in the day. You're talking to people that, work for the government, that are saying these things too. So that's kind of why I like that angle and the approach that you're taking too, because it kind of adds more to it. Like if these guys are saying, even one of them, I think in the Roswell book, in one of the newspaper articles, somebody was they were mentioned as one of the most responsible, credible people in the community, and they were in the paper, mentioning that they saw a UFO like object somewhere. But that's really one thing I've been just really intrigued with, and I'm glad like this festival. I used to work at the Town Crier, and I know you all would always publicize on there, so I'd always make sure to go to the festival. So I know this year, tell us more about the lineup. Who can we see and things like that in the location?
Well, as you all probably realize, we didn't have any sort of UFO related events at all before this began in 2011. There was absolutely nothing here. People, the topic of UFOs became popular through the various cable TV channels, UFO Hunters and the early series UFO Files, and then all the shows that have come since then, as well as Ancient Aliens, which has been incredibly popular. So we decided, because I had been invited to speak at Roswell for several years, I spoke at the Roswell UFO Festival, which is the biggest UFO festival in the world. It was started in the late 1990s. But because I had been invited to speak there, and I had gone up there and experienced that for several years in a row, I was contacted by the city of Edinburg, and I had spoken to Letty Leha, who runs the library and the arts council for the city of Edinburg. about possibly having a Roswell-like event, but on a smaller scale. Obviously, we can't do everything that Roswell has done. They have people from all over the world visiting their festival every year. So that's how it began 9 years ago, really 10, because we skipped last year due to the pandemic. But we wanted to have a Roswell-like festival commemorating UFOs, the UFO topic in general. And we kicked it off with two of the biggest names in UFO discussions, and that's Stanton Friedman, whom I already mentioned, the nuclear physicist, the late and great Stanton Friedman, who was the first man who brought out the Roswell UFO crash, and was involved in the first research that was ever done about it. And then also Travis Walton, whose story about being abducted and taken aboard a UFO was featured in the Hollywood movie Fire in the Sky.
I want to talk to you more about that one in a bit, but definitely, so like you had a chance to bring them up, so that was the first show. Wow.
And we've had Travis a couple of times back since then. He loves Edinburgh so much. He loves the valley, and we hope to have him back. There's been talk of getting a new movie done that's closer to it's more in line with Travis's actual experience, as opposed to the first movie, Fire in the Sky, was a bit too Hollywood, dramatized.
I'm pretty sure you heard it in person, but I heard it in the Joe Rogan podcast recently, and I was just constantly like going back and forth, like what did he say? Did he just say that? And it was really compelling. Like, gave me goosebumps too, just his experience. And I do want to talk more about that in a bit, but let's so then after that, so this lineup this year, how are we gonna?
Well, we've had I was just kind of going back a little bit. We've had some tremendous speakers over the years. I don't know if you had a chance to look over the PowerPoint of all the past UFO festivals, but we've had the top of the top of the world's UFO speakers, and this year is really no exception. There's some really fantastic speakers, even though it's kind of an abbreviated format this year. Normally we do for the conference, well, there's a festival which will be this more or less the same, which is on Friday night. It's an open air, family friendly, with music and booths and food and so forth. And that one anyone can attend, and it's free. But normally all day Saturday, the following Saturday, all day would be speakers from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. It's a full day of speakers normally.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But this year it's a little bit abbreviated. Of course, we're still having to be cognizant of pandemic safety measures. And so this year it's going to be outdoors. It's going to be at the Ebony Hills Golf Course, and it's going to take place in the evening on Saturday.
And what are the dates again? Just so for the listeners.
Well, the main functions are Friday night, April 9th, and then the conference is Saturday night, April 10th. So back to back. There's also an event on Thursday, which is a UFO Open Mic. People can show up and talk about their own UFO experiences, which we've had some really interesting ones that I have followed up on, and other UFO researchers. After these people spoke to us at that open mic, we followed up, and we have actually written up articles about some of the events that have taken place here in the Valley as a result of people coming up and talking. So UFO Open Mic is on Thursday, April 8th. The UFO Festival is on Friday night, April 9th. And the actual UFO conference with the major UFO speakers is on Saturday night at the Ebony Hills Golf Course.
That's great. No, I'm glad that it's also like an outdoor event too. That way you can look up at the sky and things like that. Start looking at things.
Fantastic. One of the best programs we've had is we had a couple years ago. We had a program out at the ranch north of town, north of Edinburg, where the actual 1966 Edinburg UFO incident happened.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
we were there on site. They set up folding chairs. And Ben Hansen was one of our speakers that year, and he gave us a little sky view. He explained what we were seeing up in the sky. He showed us some really fantastic high-tech equipment for looking at the night sky and identifying strange objects that you might see there. So we took people on a little walking tour where the UFO incident happened in 1966, and Ben Hansen gave us this amazing program on the night sky, and that has been one of the most popular programs.
That whole incident, I mean, that one, when I was hearing about it, can you tell us a little bit more for people that haven't heard about it before? You know, the incident, I know it involved a sheriff's son as well, or it was on a sheriff's property. Is that right? Ponce?
Yeah. J.R. Milo Ponce is a very well-known, he's passed away now, of course, but he's a very well-known local law enforcement agent and county judge for Hidalgo County in the past. In fact, there's a county park that's named after Milo Ponce. He was a very well-known politician. For those of us, because I'm a little older, growing up in the 60s and 70s, everybody knew Milo Ponce. He had almost legendary status in Hidalgo County in Edinburg, and was our county judge later in his life, as I mentioned. Really, the incident, he was at the time in 1966 that this happened, he was just a deputy sheriff. And he was assigned that night when the call came in at around midnight that some men were standing out in the middle of this farm road north of Edinburg, screaming for help as at passing cars that were passing by. So it was a disturbance that was caused by these agitated men. He was dispatched to go out there. So he was at home at the time, but he got in his patrol vehicle and went out there to see what was going on. And what it turned out to be is these workers that were working in a caliche pit had an amazing UFO encounter where this object came out of the night sky. It kicked up this, basically what was like a storm that was happening only in their area. I mean, it was a completely clear night. There was no bad weather anywhere in the valley.
And what time of the month was this? Like a typical like summer, like
this was in the fall.
In the fall, yeah, just a clear fall day, yeah.
Just definitely. A clear fall night, and they were working on site and living on site in a little mobile home because they were all from Dallas. They had come down here as a crew. They had come down as a crew to work at this caliche pit north of Edinburg. Well, all of a sudden, in the middle of the night, there was this commotion. They came out and they saw this craft. It shot a beam down at them, which basically burned everything up in their whole campsite. It started their mobile home on fire, so they had to run for it. Later on, when Milo Ponce arrived at the scene and the Edinburg Fire Department and other local fire departments, they found everything burned and melted. All the construction, the big heavy construction equipment was all burned and melted. And their mobile home was just charred. There was almost nothing left. And now you can go today, and we've had, as I mentioned, we had a program out there, and we've had a program out there a couple of times during the UFO conference. You can go out there, you'll still see pieces of metal, burned metal, mm-hmm. and you can pick up burned rocks, completely charred inside and out. So it was quite an incident.
By chance, Noe, has anybody ever, I guess, done radioactive activity to see if, again, there's any radioactive, material there, anything like that, or if
we've had a number of investigators come and and bring some equipment, and they have found some interesting anomalous readings out there. They're very high electromagnetic readings. Radioactivity wise, there seems to be nothing significant. Of course, it's been so many years since this happened, but they did pick up a lot of anomalous readings, electromagnetic readings out in the vicinity of exactly where the encounter happened. And that's interestingly where you can still find the blackened rocks and the charcoal that was left from all the wreckage. So, and
the
I
thing
really
that got me
appreciate,
too, no, the thing
I
that got
really
me too was
appreciate
like
that.
they're. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I appreciate the current landowners out there have tried to keep the area more or less intact.
And for the most part, can the public go over there, or how's that? Do they have to contact the landowners and stuff
No,
like that?
Yeah, it's all closed off.
it's all closed off, and the folks that own it, although they've been very good with during the UFO conference of letting the city use the facilities to hold programs, but generally speaking, you can't get there. It's totally.
But the thing about this story too is that they're actually like had to write down police reports and things like that, right?
All that stuff is missing. We've done
Whoa.
extensive research, but what happened was Milo Ponce was contacted by Air Force officials a few days after this happened, and he was told to never disclose to anyone what he had seen and what he had experienced. And the same thing, I mean, they sat him down and they sat the sheriff of Hidalgo County at that time, who was, of course, Milo's boss. And they told him that the story goes no further from here. And Milo told his son, who is the source of this story, Milo told his son that the Air Force guys gathered up all the reports and all the documents. So we didn't really expect that we would find anything, but we did search. And
no, definitely.
And what about the those men that were working there? I'm sure there's been some interviews with them, or not.
Their identities are unknown, and we have no documentation as to who they were. They were from Dallas, and they had come down here as a crew, and they were described by Milo Ponce as hardened redneck types, and yet they were so frightened by what they experienced that some of them, even when Milo first made contact with them, he noticed that they had urinated on themselves.
Oh wow!
So they were extremely frightened. They described this strange object that they had seen flying over their camp, and he says that they had been reduced down to they wanted to leave as soon as possible. They wouldn't go back to the work site the next day, and they took a Greyhound bus out of town as quickly as they could because they just abandoned their job.
They didn't want anything to do with it.
They wanted to get out of town.
Like this is like I didn't even want to be here type of
they abandoned the job, and even they didn't care about getting paid for the work they'd already done. They just took off back to Dallas. So we don't know who they are, unfortunately.
And that's 1966. So I know, like, even some of your books, they take place even before that. So tell us, like, the process when it comes to your research. I know with Cowboys and Aliens, you got into a few journal accounts, things like that. Can you tell us more?
And real quick, Noe, you do have several books on Cowboys and Aliens. I think it's like a 3-part series extending from the beginning 1800s to the late 1800s. You have several books, and if you could just read the titles to us and where we could find them, and then we'll get into the gist of it.
Well, it's an interesting project. I'll just give you the quick highlights of it. A few years back, before Steven Spielberg released his famous
Cowboys and Aliens movie.
It was very interesting. I liked it, but it had nothing to do with real UFO cases. A friend of mine who is an historian from Roswell, New Mexico, I met him during my various trips to Roswell to do UFO research and to participate in the annual conference there, John LeMay, and he's currently the director, the president of the Historical Society for Southeast New Mexico, and has worked at the museum the historical museum in Roswell for many years. As he started off as a volunteer and now is like the head of it. Anyway, he told me that he came up to me once and he said, "Wouldn't it be interesting to put together any cases that might exist of UFO cases in the 1800s during the Wild West?"
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was a great idea. He himself has no background at all in UFO research or not a particular interest in it, but I did. So he and I ended up putting together a little book that we aimed mainly at school age kids. That was the original one back in 2008, 2009 timeframe. It was a little like a 120-page book. As I said, aimed mainly at middle school, high school kids, called The Real Cowboys and Aliens, The Real Cowboys. And we had a lot of success. We spoke at schools, the kids loved it. But then we broke through into the adult market, and a lot of UFO people liked it. And we were invited to speak at UFO conferences about it. And so over the course of time, we decided to expand on that original little book and do a whole series. So we have now done 3 books to follow up. We started off with one book that covers a time period of 1800 to 1864 called Early American UFOs. So this covers a time period that we just briefly, we had like 1 or 2 cases in that original little book. Well, here we expanded it. This book is actually targeted and is at a reading style for adults, as opposed to, the first book we did. So this is about 300 pages, and it's just focused on the early 19th century. And then we followed that up with the Old West UFOs, which is, it covered the middle part of the 19th century, the 1865 to 1895, and it covers what is generally known as the cowboy time period. And then the latest book that we just released is The Coming of the Airships, which is 1896 to 1899. Now, that's a fascinating time period because most of the UFO sightings in the 19th century occurred during this very short time period, from 1896 to 1899. During that 3 to 4 year time period, we had the so-called airships. And the reason they were called airships is because airships were just barely starting to be invented and developed. But these were clearly something else. Even though people called them airships, they were clearly not man-made airships that people were seeing. So what got us interested in this is that almost all of these cases occurred before anything was supposed to be up in the air, flying around, except for like gas-filled, helium-filled balloons.
Oh, kind of like the hot air balloon type of,
right.
Is that what they're trying to do back then?
And normally they go straight up and straight down during this time period. The dirigibles with the rigid exterior that could be moved by a motor, those didn't come in until after 1900 for the most part, although there might have been some experimental ones prior to 1900. So we're talking about people were seeing fast-moving metallic discs going at very fast speeds. They were glinting in the sun, and they saw entities that were standing outside of landed craft. And all these things were happening during this time period of 1800 to 1899. So something else was going on that seems to have an otherworldly explanation. So we think there was technology here being exhibited that could not be explained away very easily.
And what's interesting about that is that, I mean, this is back in the 1800s, right? I mean, everybody, at least for the most part, not everybody, but a good portion maybe of the population believes that, the first crash landing was, Roswell, and that all these sightings happened, post Roswell. But what I think is very interesting about, your series is that it touches on a period where, there's actual accounts of these objects. And also I think you mentioned also in the books something about the Men in Black were even kind of seen back in that day too, and people
Well,
disguise and stuff like that.
it really knocked us for a loop when we started compiling all of these documented. All of these were reported in at least one major newspaper or multiple newspapers at the time, which this was, of course, before television or radio or other
Right.
media.
Yeah. Like that was everybody's Twitter, back in the day. Once it was up there, you can't delete it. You can't delete it. It's there. It's public knowledge.
So
Yeah.
you look at those historical and the research that we did, you look at those historical newspapers and you find these stories mentioned in major newspapers of the day. And so we were looking at cases, we started looking at cases, and then suddenly we found all these stories where witnesses would see an object, would see it land, and then standing around the landing site would be these men dressed in black clothing, sometimes described as black suits, wearing colored eyeglasses, which, by the way, were not a common thing to be seen in the 18th
Oh no, definitely not.
So in fact, they referred to them like in one of the, I'm thinking of one in particular in the 1860s, they called them smoked glasses, which is they would take eyeglasses and they would, like add a smokiness to them to help people cut down on the amount of light. It was an early form of sunglasses. So you had these guys wearing hats, smoky glasses, and all in black. And there were multiple cases where there was a UFO sighting followed by these entities who would always have the most unusual story to tell to the witnesses.
Like an explanation, basically, or something like that.
They would tell them, we are working on a new type of craft, new type of airship that's going to revolutionize air travel. And we don't want you to say anything to anybody yet, because this is all going to be disclosed to the public in the next few months or years. And then everybody in the whole world will hear from it, about it, and will benefit from it. And then, of course, history tells us that information was never disclosed. This was just a cover story. They were just saying things. In another case, they actually threatened the witnesses and said, we don't want you to tell anybody about what you're seeing here. They always had some way to deflect attention. Like, there's nothing to see here, just move along. All of this is just an experiment. You'll be hearing about it in all your newspapers very soon. Just move along. There was always a deflection.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. Just trying to that's still kind of something that you see even in one of your other stories a few years later at the Mexico Roswell, as you say, is like it happened on the border, right?
And you had written a book about that as well, right?
So there was kind of somebody threatening. I think it was a pilot that you mentioned or something like that.
And then it wasn't until he was like 80 years old that he finally decided to kind of tell his story, right? If we're not mistaken.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, of course. The Coyame, Chihuahua UFO crash of 1974. That's in our more recent times. That's within the memory of a lot of people still living today. But generally speaking, in the many hundreds of UFO landings and or crashes that we have looked into, there's always been these strange stories of where witnesses are intimidated, misled, they're fed cover stories. And certainly that was the case in the Coyame, the so-called Mexico's Roswell case, which Ruben Uriarte and I were the first ones to bring to the public attention, and we wrote the first book about it. So yeah, absolutely. There's been these efforts by these beings, these entities, or whoever they are, to mislead people who happen to see what they were not supposed to see.
Yeah, no, that's another thing too, because I think in that radio interview you did a few years ago, or maybe it was already like time flies, right? 2007.
Mhm.
That you mentioned that you had some recordings, like he was saying Mayday, Mayday, something like that.
That's right. He was. Well, there was another. There's two. There were two separate incidents. There was the 1955 Colonel Robert Willingham UFO crash near Del Rio, Texas.
Okay, okay,
And
that's I might be getting them
when we
confused.
were
Okay.
when we were first working on these two books, we did a book on Mexico's Roswell, which was from 1974, and then there was the crash near Del Rio. But
Mhm.
when it was first coming together for us, we were confused also, and we thought maybe they were the witnesses were talking about the same incident because it happened along the border, the Texas-Mexico border. There's a lot of similarities, but then we began to space them apart. One happened way back in the 50s.
Wow.
And the guy who gave us that story was the pilot who chased the UFO in a jet fighter plane and saw it land near Del Rio. And the other one happened in 1974, and that was where a UFO crashed with a small plane and then fell to the desert below. So we finally figured out two different stories.
No, that's interesting, and just the fact that there was a lot of cover up, right? I mean, that's just the like. Can we go back to the Mexico, the one in Chihuahua? I did want to hear more about that.
And just to clarify, the one in Chihuahua, you had mentioned just now that basically the flying object crashed with a, I guess, U.S. government airplane. Is that what kind of happened in that?
It was a private plane.
Okay.
It had taken off from El Paso Airport at about 9:30 p.m. and then one of the common flight paths going to Mexico City from El Paso takes it over the area of Coyame, Chihuahua, which is about 40 to 50 miles south of Presidio, Texas.
Okay.
Which is on the border. That's where you can cross over. It's in the Big Bend area of Texas. So Presidio, we've been there. We had a conference there several years in a row, and we crossed over and we drove from Presidio about 40, 50 miles to Coyame. We interviewed people there and went out to the site where this supposedly happened. But what happened there was that supposedly after the crash, a team was sent by the Mexican army to recover the crashed saucer. However, apparently something coming out of the saucer, I don't know if it was a gas or something caused all the Mexican soldiers to die at the scene.
Oh, at the scene, wow.
Yeah, and none of them had any kind of protective suits on them. And then shortly after that, the U.S., which had been monitoring the incident, they came across out of the Army base in El Paso, Fort Bliss. They came down in helicopters and dressed in biohazard gear, and they took the saucer back into Texas. And then from Texas, they took it supposedly to Atlanta.
And to be quite frank, I mean, do you think it's possible that this was a government ship, a U.S. government ship? It was just an experiment, and they were, really testing new technology. I mean, I know. Yeah, because I feel like some of these, accounts, I think they're legitimately, possibly, unidentified flying objects.
Yeah.
But then sometimes, right, it seems that the government is like, okay, let's go pick up our, experiment. Let's go pick up that, prototype that we were trying out that, and we don't really know about.
No, and one thing I know you mentioned too, Noe, is that most of these happen at bases, right? Like some of these little sightings, things like that.
Like around bases. It's an interesting phenomenon that a lot of UFO sightings have occurred at or near military installations throughout the United States. What comes to mind right away is in the 80s when suddenly all of the controls for arming and shooting off nuclear missiles in a nuclear missile silo in Montana started shutting down spontaneously as a UFO was spotted over the base. So incidents like this are very well known, and you know, there's different theories. Are they surveilling our military bases? Could they be experimental craft, as Area 51 type scenario, where supposedly captured UFOs have been reverse engineered out out in Nevada at the air base?
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, just to clarify, Area 51 is in Nevada. It's about
Yes.
150 miles north of Las Vegas. We've been out there on several occasions. I remember when I was speaking in Roswell, New Mexico, people would come up to me and tell me, "Can you tell me where around here is Area 51?"
Area 51.
And I said, Area
Oh,
51.
definitely.
Area 51 is not in Roswell. It's not even in New Mexico. It's north of Las Vegas. So a lot of people think they kind of lump Roswell and Area 51 together.
I'm pretty sure a lot of people found out, especially a couple years ago when they did that little Facebook event. Remember?
Storm Area 51.
51. But I heard they actually did something pretty good at the city over, right? That is real like a tourist attraction as well. Out there in Area 51.
I would go out there. Anyone who's interested in this topic, it's a fascinating place to
I
visit.
love it. Yeah.
You cannot go into the base, and in fact, you have to be really careful when you're there at the gate, because they are watching you 24/7 with electronic surveillance and armed guards. And you can go on YouTube and you can find what happens to people that have crossed that